Welcome to Telling Impactful Stories with Data, a practical guide for using data in your writing. So for those of you who may not know who I am, my name is Caroline Ruckert, and I have the distinct pleasure of being the JANZSSA editor and chief. Um, and I'm going to introduce a couple of folks before we jump in, but I want to start by acknowledging country. And just acknowledging that these have been and always will be Aboriginal lands. And today I have the privilege of being on Yagara and Turrbal land, and I would just invite everybody to acknowledge country in the chat. So in terms of today, I'm delighted to also introduce to you Natalie. Natalie, if you just want to switch on your mic and say a quick hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here today.
So with JANZSSA, we've always had a journal, and one of the things that we recognize with JANZSSA is it's a journal where we want to bring theory and practice together, but we really want to create a space for the voice of the practitioner. And I'm delighted to announce that Natalie Ostergo from the University of Southern Queensland has taken on the ambitious role of being the associate editor for JANZSSA, who will be overseeing our professional development strategy moving forward. And Natalie also provides thought leadership for our Voices from the Field section. So please join me in congratulating Natalie on her appointment, and just moving forward, you won't hear as much from me and more from Natalie. So today's session is focusing on all things data. Next slide, please. Why did we want to do this? Well, one of the privileges of being an editor-in-chief is I get to read all the articles as they come in. And one of the things that we have noted from author feedback is if you're an experienced researcher, data doesn't necessarily isn't something you think about too much in terms of how to present it. But if you're a first-time author or you're a practitioner doing research, understanding how to leverage data, how to tell data stories, how to do something as practical as how do you present it in a professional practice paper or in a peer-reviewed paper. We were getting a lot of questions related to data. And so we thought, well, if our authors have questions, why not actually create the conditions for some shared learning on the topic? And that then led to me reaching out to two humans that I think know more about data than most of us, but who also have the beautiful ability to also support others to build their data literacy. So today we have two facilitators, and I'm delighted to introduce you to them. The first facilitator today is Dr. Christine Devine, and Christine is a senior lecturer in medical education at USQ, where she leads curriculum and assessment design. Sorry, UQ, pardon me. What did I say? A different university, probably. And Christine supports curriculum and assessment design across years 1 and 2 of the medical program. But the other role that Christine has played across her career is she's been one of those unique academics who has existed in the third space and also worked as a STEM educator at universities. She's worked as a lecturer, and she's held a range of different roles, which gives her a really unique perspective in the conversation today. Our second facilitator today, I'm also equally delighted to introduce, and hopefully I won't get the name or the institution incorrect, is Dana Burfeind. And Dana is an experienced researcher and educator. Dana works across a number of different universities in a range of different capacities as a lecturer and a sessional. But she's also, similar to Christine, held a number of different roles across her career, and also has worked within STEM education at universities, both in the academic side of the world and also in the student-facing side. So I can't say how lucky we are to have two experienced facilitators today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Christine and Dana to kick us off. And at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about JANZSSA and just if you're interested in submitting to the journal. So with that, over to the two of you. Looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Caroline and Natalie, for having us today. And I guess just to also say that Dana and I have the fortunate position of having worked together, and we often refer to the electron cloud that exists between us, which is, it feels like we have a shared brain at times. And I think that's just a sign of I hope, a healthy working relationship. We do actually really enjoy working together. So it's really lovely to be bringing you this presentation today. We'll start off with some really, I guess, hopefully what is perceived as quite practical guidance for you, and it will be quite generalized. But towards the end, we're going to switch, and Dana's going to give you one of our stories of using, hopefully, data quite effectively and for impact, as a nice example of how it can all come together as well. So really the purpose for oh, sorry.
I'd also add in there that we're quite happy. We'll kind of monitor the chat. So if you guys have questions, we'll interject with those as we have a bit of a pause, and answer those as we go along. So drop things in the chat as we go, so we can kind of roll with that.
Absolutely. I think we're both quite experienced working on Zoom, as well as many of you, I'm sure are. It's just the nature of the beast these days, isn't it? So today we really want to talk about using data more effectively in our writing, and particularly when we think about a higher education or a scholarship of teaching and learning context, where what matters actually is impact, not necessarily the accuracy piece of the data in the way that we often think about when we're thinking of STEM fields in particular. So we hope this session will be really practical. We're not going to be talking about sophisticated analytics here. We're talking about how that everyday data can become convincing evidence in your writing. So to begin, I actually just want to name the challenge that many of us actually recognize. And there it is. So we have the data, okay, but we don't always know how to use it convincingly in our writing. And as all of you are no doubt very acutely aware, just the nature of higher education and the context we find ourselves in, whether that is working in a student services context, or being in that third space, there's an enormous amount of data that is generated day to day. So that's great. There's a heap of data available for us to use, but impact is what the harder thing to actually communicate. So one reason that this can actually happen is the overwhelm, the sheer data overload in terms of what we're actually generating. And so if you think about what we're coming across day to day, there are analytics associated with our learning management systems. There are demographics that we're collecting on our student cohorts. There's attendance data still that we're looking at. There might be assessment outcomes or grades that you're looking at for courses. There can be surveys, whether these are formal, centrally provided university surveys or something that's a little more bespoke to the course or the unit that you're teaching in. Then student support services have their own data collection tools as well. There can be benchmarking in terms of thinking about different universities and our curriculum. There can be focus groups that we're running and retention data that we can be looking at. There can be timed interventions. So these might be a specific intervention that we're doing to get at a specific problem, as well as enrollments data. So sorry, just to go back, it's a huge data set, okay? And so the problem that we often find ourselves facing is that it isn't a lack of data. It's deciding which data is actually going to support the story that we're trying to tell. So in this case, then, the question actually becomes, how do we find clarity in our stories without actually collecting more data? So I think it's the nature of the beast is we all have a tendency to over collect data because we think that's where the value is. And when we do that, when we have so much data, like what I just showed you before, sometimes it can, more is not more. And it can make it harder to identify the central story that we're trying to tell. And this is a key point that Dana and I have spoken a little bit about. And it's this word of discernment. We need to actually really be quite discerning in our data use. Okay, we need to really think about the purpose and how that data is going to feature in the story that we want to tell. Now, this is when our story comes in, because the narrative or the story that we shape around our data guides decisions about which data we're going to just acknowledge and which ones we want to really feature as the key players in our story. But most importantly, a strong story has to start with a really clear question, okay, or a problem worth solving. And in our space, in our fields, the focus really of that story and how we tell it should be shaped by the audience that we're writing it for. And, really thinking about those potential implications for practice. What are you hoping the readers take away from this? How will they transfer this into their own context and implement so that it actually lands, it does have impact? So this is a really key point, and it's one of those that if we start and we're thinking about the problem from the outset, we can often start to piece together the data and the story that we want to tell. It's harder to do it in retrospect because then you're really starting to think about, what do I have and how is this actually telling me the story?
And I would add in there, Christine, that if we think about the work that goes into writing a paper, a lot of it really does come from that discerning use of data and figuring out, where is our question in what we're asking, and not as much the writing. Once you have a really clear narrative, the writing becomes a lot simpler because you know where you're going and where you've come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even just to take a step back and thinking about how, sometimes a key part of this process is actually thinking about ethics and if we require ethics for collection of this data at the start. And while that can seem sometimes quite an overwhelming process to go through, what it gives you from the get-go is a little bit of a clarity around the problem that you're trying to solve and what information is going to best support answering that question. So,
and I'd also say though that don't be scared of ethics. It's a system process, you follow it, and if you're doing de-identified large data sets, it's usually a fairly straightforward process. Essential.
It's definitely essential, and I do think it does add clarity from the get-go in the story that we want to tell. Okay, so we're overwhelmed, we've got a lot of data, and we're starting to think about how we're going to find clarity in those large data sets. But I want to come to a key idea, and that is that data doesn't automatically communicate impact, okay, on its own. And to do this, I've got a little bit of an example. So this might look like quite a simplistic example, but I hope it will illustrate the point. So this is a table just showing 2 years and looking at total academic support appointments per year. And just if you want to pop in the chat, if you were the reader, what would you actually conclude from this table? Support contact has increased? More support? Yep. Increase in academic appointments? Yes.
I like that there's a range of possible inferences here, actually.
Yeah, I do too. And I like the fact that you've said not a lot as well.
Yeah, because I mean, really, it's only 2 data points, right? So you don't even get any sort of concept of that variability.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so I think you've nailed it. And I love there's a one there around context. So we're going to come to that because that's really important. So just by itself, we're all having to do a little bit of the work here, right? So we actually can't take much from there, apart from that the number of appointments has increased, right? Or the demand has increased. But we don't have anything further to go off, right? So this is the idea that, one data point alone isn't always enough. And when we have data as part of a bigger picture, suddenly it becomes a little more useful. So an analogy I like for this is that idea of the mosaic, okay? And if we think of our data as a mosaic where each table or graph or figure is a tile in this mosaic, on its own, that doesn't necessarily tell you a lot, okay? But impact itself actually comes with how we bring that together. So if we think about the tiles that we're selecting, how we place them in the overall mosaic, but then also how we interpret them. It becomes around deciding which tiles are going to matter in the story that we want to tell and how they will actually come together. So a way that I like to think about this, and it's a pretty simple framework, is that idea of what, so what, and now what. So I want to go back to that original data set that we just looked at and have a look at it presented a little differently. So in this case, what I've done is I've taken the exact same data set, but I've broken it down by weeks. Okay. Now, if you have a look at this table, and I'll show you in a graphical version in a tick, what are you taking away from this now? Is there any difference in the data and how it's coming out at you? Yeah, could be around, yep, the assignments.
And that's where it's really important, right? Where you could overlay another piece of data is
I'll
if
show
you
you in
looked at
graphic.
what the assessment, if you looked at what that assessment timetable looks like, if you do see those pulses around then.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we have a look at it in graphical, I think sometimes the patterns can become, or the trends, yes, can start to pop out. So
yeah, and I think that's an interesting one that got picked up here. That it's interesting that it's doubled in the first week, right? Which
yeah,
I think the point is that it brings you more questions. Why?
yes.
Why is there a difference?
Yeah, that's right. And so the context now starts to matter. So if we start to think about the what in this case is the pattern. And that if we compare 2023 and 2024, we're seeing uptake or the number of appointments increasing earlier in the semester. Yes, absolutely. Maybe an intervention program was introduced. So this brings us to the so what, which is the interpretation of the data. So one possible interpretation is that the students are engaging earlier in the year as opposed to more often. But perhaps we've had an intervention. It could be something that's introduced earlier in the semester to encourage students to seek support or assistance earlier. So the context starts to matter. And then if I think about what are the implications of this, the now what do I do with this pattern, or what do I do with this trend in my data that's starting to emerge? And this is where the impact lives. What are we going to do with it? And the pattern might support a continuation or a scaling of any sort of early semester outreach so that students are connecting with support earlier in the semester as opposed to waiting until all the later in the semester when the assessments increase. But the context, what surrounds this information, is really, really important here. So this kind of way of thinking and approaching these problems can have quite a simple framework, which I'll introduce you to now. So it starts with the purpose. And the purpose is what's the question that you're actually looking to answer? Okay. And we touched on that earlier when we were talking about the ethics, because that makes you think of the purpose from the get-go. And then it's about the evidence. So what is the data that I need that will help to answer that question? Once you have that data, it's the insight. So what does the data actually tell us? And then finally, the implication. Why does it matter? Why does it matter for practice or the practice of others, or decision making at a higher level? So it's about bringing that whole story to a conclusion. Now, the choice of format, I hope one of the things that you might have picked up on is some of this is easier to look at in a table, and others, like when we're looking at a pattern or a trend, it might be easier to actually visualize in a graph. So we can have it, sometimes it comes down to choosing the right form for your data. And when Dana presents a case study later, you'll see how those have been used interchangeably. So if, for example, I was just looking at some simple data, so a table might be perfect for just communicating numbers. But if I was looking for patterns of change over time, as when we started to break down that other data set, a graph might be a great way to do that. Now, some of you may also be collecting what we call qualitative data as well. And so this is important for the text in terms of the text and the insight and how we generate that too. So the text, when we have that accompanying our data, is where the interpretation and the meaning actually come to life. So I would say that strong writing of these data stories really comes down to using all three of these elements judiciously, and making sure that when we are talking about our data, that we're referring explicitly to it as well. So, like I said, this idea of referring often to your data and having it support your arguments also applies to our qualitative data sets. And these can be quite extensive. And again, it comes down to using them judiciously to support your story that you're trying to tell. But they can be used, they can add incredible richness to a quantitative data set. And we'll give you an example of that in a moment. But yeah, often it gives the why to the data. So one of the things that we have to do, and I won't say that we are experts on this part to any extent, but it's breaking down. If you could, the qualitative data sets can be absolutely enormous, and a key part of that is bringing it down to a few key themes, and then making sure that you have quotes or text that supports the development of those themes, and those themes are then introduced into your story. And Dana will show you that in just a moment. Okay, so before that, let's come back to a common trap. So I gave you that simple data, story framework. And one of the key traps for people is thinking they have the data to support the question that they're answering, but they fail to interpret the data. And so we end up with what we call the evidence insight gap. Okay. So you have the data, okay, but you're not interpreting it. You're not giving you're making the reader do all the hard work. And this can also happen if you're not providing the text and insight piece. So for example, if you've got the data in tables and figures, but they're sitting beside the argument as opposed to being a core piece that is building and supporting your argument. And when readers have to do all of the work in supplying the meaning, it's an instant way to actually lose the impact of your writing, but also lose your audience. Because if people can't see the implications for their own practice or can't see the key takeaways emerging, they will tune out. What do you think, Dana?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's probably the difference with us working in the third space. Both Christine and I come from academic disciplinary scientist backgrounds, and those kind of, I guess, areas, there was lots of space for kind of pie in the sky theoretical work. But that's not the space that we're working in here. And so this isn't, I guess, go along with the thought exercise and, oh yeah, maybe that's interesting, and maybe eventually I'll see some application. Like in this case, it's people are time poor. Most of the media that we're consuming at the moment is really short form. And so if people have to really work for it, they're not going to read your work, right? And the point of us publishing in the work that we're doing here is to actually make a difference, right? Like, we're practitioners. We want our students to have a good experience, and we want change to happen. And to be honest, things happen very slowly in an academic world, and until they don't, right? But they happen very slowly. And we don't have that time for that kind of academic turnaround time, where we sit and, reflect on everything. And so that is important, to think about what our readers want, giving our readers what they want, and making sure that we've done the hard work in that interpretation for them.
And you raise a really good point there, which is the length of time this can take. And so we need to be telling stories of impact that can directly, support practice for our colleagues out there at any given time. There's no point in hiding those stories if they're becoming clear early on for, we want to create one more data set to support it, right? We need to be communicating early and often, particularly when it has implications for practice. But, things change so frequently in the higher education landscape. And I know that's certainly a lesson I take from the bench science, is you can collect so much data, but it's not necessarily adding anything extra to the story and the impact that comes with it. It's just, increasing your data, increasing your N. So tell those stories of impact and tell them well, and tell them as often as you can.
Well, and I think that, the sage advice of one of my PhD supervisors was, the best thesis is a done thesis. And I think the same thing is but I think the same thing is for a paper. And
so true.
Christine and I have so many works in progress where we do get stuck in the data overwhelm because we've collected so much, and we want to make sure that we're telling the best story and the perfect story, and get as much impact out of it as possible. But sometimes it's important to find one really important piece of information and convey that message, because you'll find that there's a bit of a snowballing effect of it. And part of the reason that you get information out there and you present at conferences and go to conferences and meet people is so that you can actually have some of that synergy, and that's incredibly important.
Helps you understand where the gaps are too, and how your work can contribute in that space as well. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to hand over to Dana, because I think now that we've got a bit of a general idea of how we can use things, let's have a look at how it all comes together in an example.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So I'm going to present a case study of some work Christine and I did several years ago. We were working in a central learning and teaching unit, and part of our job was to partner with faculties, academics and faculties, where they found, where they had pain points, and come in and work with the academics to, I always thought of myself as a bit of a fairy godmother, there, and be a bit invisible in the background and help solve some problems. And so we were working with pre-service primary school teachers. There we collected so much data because we worked with this group for several years. We have a collection of both quantitative and qualitative data, but it also links to several other pieces of work we were doing because we were trialing the intervention that I'm going to discuss in science faculties and with health science students who had to take science units that they perhaps weren't very confident with. And so I've taken a subset of that data to present today to show you how we can really marry up that quantitative and qualitative data to tell a story. So I'm going to acknowledge from the very start that this is a subset of a subset of data. So we have this large data set. We've presented it all at an academic conference, the full data set. And now I'm going to show you a central theme within that to show how that we can do that pairing of data. So our overall project is on building confidence in scientific inquiry skills with pre-service primary school teachers. These students, we know that there is a problem with their confidence in science. And we know that it's really important that these people are going out to be primary school teachers. They are going to be the ones teaching science, because it's very rare that you have a specialist scientist teaching science in a primary school. So so they have to be generalists in all the subjects. And if you have really people who are not confident in teaching science, then it's quite possible that the quality of science teaching could be not as exciting or poor. And so we are deeply passionate about making sure that there's high quality teaching, and that's what we were coming in to help support. So we did a pre-survey where we did Likert scale responses. So we have some quantitative data, and then we had one open-ended survey question. We did a 1-hour intervention with each of the workshops over a 3-year period, and several workshops a year. So you can see we had quite a reasonable sized data set there. Our 1-hour intervention was to teach them scientific inquiry skills by giving them hands-on experience doing a scientific inquiry. And we gave them marshmallows, and we said, change the environment for these marshmallows. So they put them in microwaves, they put them in different liquids, they squished them, they did all sorts of fun stuff with them, right? And then we did the same kind of follow-up post-survey where we did Likert scale responses with an open-ended kind of reflection one. So I'm going to show you how it is that we put those data sets together to tell this story. So one of the questions we asked on the Likert scale was, I feel confident with my ability to design a scientific inquiry. There is a whole strand of the Australian curriculum about science inquiry skills. So there's, of course, your science content understanding, but your science inquiry skills are basically half of what we teach in a primary school. So their pre-survey here, we have kind of a, I don't know, bell curve distribution where we don't have a bunch of people that are really confident. We've got more, I guess, we're leaning more towards the disagree side. But not anybody, not very many people coming out there. Yep, I know exactly what I'm doing. I can do this. I can go into a classroom and do this tomorrow. So then we pair that with our qualitative data. And we found a few themes. Now, obviously, I've simplified this into 2 themes that I'm going to discuss. And one of them is that they have a negative science experience. So they were hopeless when they did science, so that they just zoned out and they quit doing it. Or I failed at doing science, so I stopped. I never had any fun experiences with science, right? And we're giving them an intervention that's fun. Or I just was copying slabs of text, which is obviously something we don't want them to do, right? But you can see how that's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy of, we've given them, they've had this negative science experience. It's not exciting. We're not going to engage. And they haven't done anything hands-on. So we're giving them that hands-on experience. The other thing that we saw come out of it is that it's boring or not relevant to their life. So their previous experiences were boring. They didn't have any connection to themselves and what they were doing, which fortunately the Australian curriculum does have now. As a part of it, says you have to, science is a human endeavor, so you relate your science to what it is that you're doing, which is an improvement from probably when these students were in school. I also found that science classes were boring and not relevant to life, except for biology. So that's, I don't know, I guess gives us an understanding of why we saw that kind of distribution that we saw. And we had a couple of more positive themes, but this answered our why as to why those students were not as confident in doing these skills. Now we go to our after survey.
Dana, did you just want to mention what the intervention was?
I did at the start.
Oh,
I did. Marshmallows.
Okay.
Marshmallows.
Sorry. Yes.
So they had an hour. They did experiments with marshmallows. They designed their own investigation. There we go.
There's the fun.
It was fun. I should have put some pictures in there to prompt it. Anyway, so we followed up and asked the same question again. And I've made a choice here because it's a presentation where I've given you the before data separate with the after data. If you were presenting this as a part of a paper, you would stylistically do that in a different way. So you would either present it here where you have them overlaid with each other, or you could have a stacked, if you had maybe multiple intervention or measurement points, where you'd have each of these individually stacked so you can see that shifting pattern on top of each other. In this case, this one would probably be sufficient with this question. So I asked exactly the same question. I feel confident with my ability to design a scientific inquiry. You can see there's a substantial shift over towards the agree, strongly disagree. Nobody, fortunately, was still in strongly disagree area. So we have a substantial increase in the confidence and the patterning of their confidence in doing a scientific inquiry. Now, why? What did they learn from that? I'll get a sec. So why or what did they learn from that? Many key themes. I'm going to talk about two. One of them is that failure is okay. So we know from the literature that when teachers are teaching, they like to feel like they know what's going on and feel authority in front of the class. And a lot of people are not comfortable with being uncomfortable and uncertainty. And we gave them that experience that uncertainty is okay and you can come out the other side alive. And that's incredibly important for them because they need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's one of the biggest barriers to doing scientific inquiries or inquiries more broadly in schools. So they had that firsthand experience. We learned, great. They learned that sometimes the results aren't what you expect. Great, right? That's the start of a new question. Or failure is how we learn. Yes, we want them to learn that failure is normal and failure is how you learn. Great. And science can be exciting and can spark creativity, right? I think Christine and I surprised a lot of people that as scientists that we're so creative, because I think people have this, like middle-aged people in white coats in labs, white lab coats all the time, vision of scientists.
Plenty of that too. Yes.
Oh, there most certainly is.
Yeah.
But science itself is inherently creative, and I think that people miss that.
Yeah.
The other
and
piece that
loads of uncertainty too.
Loads of uncertainty. So the other piece that we got out of it is that they've learned their science investigation skills. Now, I put this theme in here to discuss because none of them say, I learned investigation skills, right? And when you see your data, you might see something quite similar where they don't say something, but you look at what they're meaning from what they're saying. So in this case, I know how to design an experiment. Well, that is a scientific investigation skill. I learned how to add controls. Yes, you need that in your investigations. I learned how to navigate challenges. All part of investigation skills. Knowing what your variables are, great. Also an investigation skill, and less is more, right? Because when we're designing investigations, change one thing, measure one thing, keep everything else the same. So they're learning about when you do an experiment, you're only changing one thing. Incredibly important. So that's what's the meaning behind those data. So yes, they're more confident, but this tells us how they're more confident, which then I guess feeds on into that future interpretation, which is important. There you go. So in summary, and this is wrapping up, the narrative into a nice, neat story, right? Is that in the past, they had prior poor experiences, and that likely shaped their views of science as being boring or not relevant. And, in your introduction, you kind of set up what the trajectory is, what that could mean, what implications would be. We then did an intervention, and it's a bang for buck intervention, right? We had a huge shift in confidence, and we were with them for 1 hour. Great. And then we also learned that this simple inquiry activity that we did can teach them the technical aspects of investigation, but it also helps the teachers become more comfortable with uncertainty and failure as a part of inquiry, right? So we're able to take this story. Thank you. We're very happy with the work. So we're able to take this and wrap it up into a nice, neat story. And I'd hope that you could see from this example how you can pair the quantitative data that says, yes, there is a difference, with the qualitative data that says, and this is what the difference is, or this is what the difference means, or we say, this is why the difference is, right? And then you're able to, that's where the literature comes in, right? Because I always talk about scientific or writing in general as a puzzle piece, right? You're just putting the next piece into the puzzle. You're not coming out of it into this from nowhere, where nobody else has done anything like this before. You're putting the next piece in, and everything you do is connected to something that's been done before, and will hopefully be connected to somebody else doing something else in the future. And so then you take your information and you link that to the literature. So this is why they've explained that, and this is why it's important based on what we know from the literature. So, all right, next. Christine, did you want this one, or am I doing this one? We can do it together. So data interpretation needs to wait. Data needs interpretation. Data needs interpretation to become meaningful. So you don't want to just throw a bunch of numbers on a page. That goes right back to Christine's point at the start, where you choose the data that you are presenting and the format that you're presenting it in. And you do the hard work. You do that interpretation for them. Because if you want to make impact, you need to make it as easy as possible for people to read your paper.
That's it. Follow along, follow the story, follow the narrative. Absolutely.
And your impact is shown through evidence and insight, right? So, and that's the difference between what you're doing here in a journal format versus a technical report. A technical report, or perhaps a report that you do within the university, you're putting in all the information because somebody might need to go back and find some tiny little bit of data, right? You have those data. You're not hiding it from everybody, but you're highlighting what's important. And that's what you're presenting as your highlights reel. And you have all the other pieces there to help support that.
That's a lovely analogy. I like that. The highlights reel. Yes.
But it is. Well, we were talking about we were talking about rock star and backup band earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So your rock star still needs its backing band, or they're not going to sound great.
Yeah.
So you need to have all your supporting data. You're not just cherry picking out what the narrative you want. You have to have the information to support it.
Absolutely.
And I think that where people get lost is it really is about having a narrative. You're telling a story, and so when I'm writing papers, I always start with the figures, and I string together my narrative from those figures, and making sure that there's alignment and flow between them.
Yeah, I think that's critical, isn't it? It's you're making the connections, and you know, as humans, I think we connect with story, and that's what we look for to give meaning to what we're doing. But we also remember stories. So if you have a memorable story that surrounds your data, people are more likely to take the key messages away from it.
I mean, well, in fact, there's a whole body of literature on storytelling pedagogy. So,
well, that's right. Yes.
So, and with that, that's what we have planned for now. I think that looking at the time, it's probably wise to just open up for Q&A at this point, and see where the discussion takes us. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana and Christine. So we'll open it up for questions now, and you can either put your video on and ask the question live, or feel free to put your question in the chat. So I think we've got one question. So feel free to go ahead.
We did have one question in the chat. Was from Jayshree. Is there a standard way or format to present tables and charts in a journal? For example, do we need to use Times New Roman or font size or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's I think Natalie's answered that absolutely correctly. There's each journal will have their own journal specific format, and you need to follow whatever the journal specific format is. And I think that if there's any uncertainty with I guess reading the guidelines, go back and look at a recent issue, because sometimes that will provide, you need that visualization of what that looks like.
Yeah.
But also, as a general rule, make sure that you're presenting data one time. So you don't want to have a table and a graph that show the same information.
Yes, exactly. And I think particularly for tables, there can be a lot of information conveyed in a table. So think very carefully around what you're including in your tables. I have seen some of late. There's some papers I've reviewed where it's actually quite overwhelming to look at, and that's where the text has to do a lot of the heavy lifting, so that you're going back to the text to provide some of that interpretation, that should hopefully just flow from a table. So do think about the data that you're presenting, and you don't have to include everything, but you have to include enough that it's supporting the story that's unfolding.
So the question is, since it's not a table and a graph at one time, do we want to add explanation/text next to the table or graph? Well, you'll have a caption or legend, depending on if it's a figure or table, for each of those that will provide the context, and then you refer to it in the text. You can have a figure, or you can have a graph and a table next to each other. You just don't want to repeat the same information in both of them.
And we've got a question from Jayshree. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much. This is very helpful and useful as well. When we're telling the story, the idea is we state the question and then sort of usually in the introduction, last paragraph, I find that that's where the gap is mentioned. And then to bring out the sort of results. Sometimes some journals have results and discussion separate, and sometimes they have it together. So I guess my question, I guess more question or sort of affirmation that I'm looking for is when we are so when it flows, as long as the graph or the table, whichever is more appropriate to answer that key question. Way to go. Is that
you can refer to it in more than one place.
okay? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you would sit within your results section, if again, this is a journal specific format issue. So some journals will have results discussion, some will have a combined results discussion, some will have results discussion conclusion, and some will have different paper formats within the same journal that have, like if they have a short form, like a note or a comment or something, a note or a something. Anyway, sometimes they will have a short form where they have a combined results and discussion, or they'll have in the same journal will have a long form that has a results and discussion separate. Just follow whatever that format is, but your table or your figure would most likely sit in your results section, but you can refer to it in your results and then refer to it again in your discussion section. That's not a problem.
Okay, cool. But in the conclusion, we're not actually referring to any tables or figures in the conclusion usually, is that? So.
Yeah, it's more conclusion depends again on it's hard because it's a bit of a journal specific format. But conclusion usually is your strong take home message. So you want your one line of interpretation. What is their key message they're going to get out of that? Student visits are increasing over time. However, there is not an increased population of students at the university or something like that. You want whatever your take home message is from it to be in your conclusion versus like referring back to the table.
Okay, thank you.
To ask a question that has come up for me with some of my colleagues before. None of us have a research background or great knowledge of SPSS. So often when we talk data, it's very similar to the data that you showed us at the start. It's around attendance, and we haven't done t-tests or correlations or all of that kind of thing. Do you think it's I guess, what's your thoughts around including or not having that kind of statistical analysis when we write a journal article? Can we still move ahead with that data and draw, conclusions from it that is valuable?
So again, this is a hard one. So it's going to be a journal specific question. Because obviously in our science journals, they would say no. I think in a third space and practitioners journal, I think in the right context, yes. I'm a very visual type of person. So I like to play with data and make graphs. This is Excel, right? So this is all kind of Excel kind of stuff. I like to visually make graphs of all the things and look at all the different possible options and then use that to ask further questions. And I think that if you're housed within a university and you get to a point where you actually need the statistics, there are people out there who can help you with that part, right? Like the actual doing of the statistics is not the hard part. You just need to find the right person that knows how to punch the right numbers. And as somebody with a very quantitative background, I don't know that I'm all on board with the current version of SPSS either, right? So it has constant updates and there's always some weird little buggy thing. So the technical expertise of knowing the right buttons to push within SPSS is less of an issue. Knowing the right tests and the right assumptions that go with it is is more important than knowing to press the right buttons.
Yeah.
But I think that
And
there's
it
a lot
comes
of
down to what you're trying to show too, of course, doesn't it? You know, because if you're just looking for a change in numbers over time, well, that might be one thing. But if you're doing analysis on, you know, more qualitative patterns that are coming out, well, that's quite different again. So often it comes down to what you're hoping to address with the information that you're pulling together. And I think the other thing that can surround this too is the context. So when we talk about interventions, if we're collecting over successive years, are all of our conditions remaining the same? Has the intervention remained the same, so that we can actually have some sort of statistical analysis that surrounds that and feel quite valid in that too? So I think there's.
That's what I was gonna say. That's one of those things where you just pick your language. So I think in an applied journal like this, if we're looking at larger trends over time, you can probably slide by with it. That's more of a Caroline question. But you just need to make sure you're careful with the language you choose. So you notice in my graph, I didn't have any statistics represented. And so I did not use the word significant. So I said there was a substantial or a marked shift, but I did not say significant, because significant implies that I've done a statistical analysis, which in that case I had not displayed a statistical analysis with it. So that's something to keep in mind, just on that careful choice of language. Caroline, do you have anything to add to this one? Because you're the one who does this.
What I would probably say is, being very careful not to make overclaims around data, because that is definitely something that we will pick up, and will often lead to reviewer feedback saying that you need to modify your claims, because what we're looking for is what is the claim and what is the evidence. And when there's a mismatch, then even though we won't do that at the level of rigor, for example, as a Q1 journal, that will be something still that we'll pick up. I think the other thing is also just some very basic things about how you label graphs, and that you're looking at, even the units that you're using on the sidebar, making sure that you're being really clear on what you're actually comparing, like for like. So these are all little things that often folks will miss, that I've noticed in JANZSSA. So that's probably my 2 cents worth there, Christine and Dana. Any
those
final
are important points?
Yeah. Any final? I have one question actually, which is just any advice on qualitative data insights, because one of the things, I call it the famous drop and run quote, that folks will, ask a question and then they'll just put the student quote in as a response. If you are tempted to do a drop and run, what, Christine and Dana, would be your advice on how to strengthen data insights by not just dropping quotes into a paper?
I think that going back to that puzzle piece analogy, but on a finer scale. So within, obviously, your whole paper is a puzzle within the greater context of the literature, but you're putting together the puzzle pieces within your own paper, and so everything needs to be connected, and you can't have any loose ends hanging there. So because it doesn't mean anything if it's not connected to something else.
Yeah, I think that speaks back to the narrative. Well, with that, we are at time. So just on behalf of everyone in the room, Christine and Dana, can I thank you very, very much for the session today. It was a really insightful session, and I really loved that theme of the framework that you gave us, which is what is your question, and just the different ways to scaffold and to really look at, it's not just having the data, but it's also being really clear on the so what around it and how you thread things together. So thank you very, very much on behalf of JANZSSA around this. And I also just want to thank everybody for attending today. If I can just go next slide. One of the things we just wanted to flag is data was one of the bits of feedback that we received, but the other piece of feedback was a lot of you are asking us, do I need ethics approval? And you're asking questions around the ethics application process. So I'm delighted to say that we will have a follow-up session on June the 18th that will specifically focus on ethics and how to apply for it, what to expect, and answer some of the questions that you've been sending through to us. If you want to leap and write a paper, but you might want some peer support. I'm delighted to also say that we've got a number of Shut Up and Write workshops that are facilitated by the fabulous Megan Posey. And those are great sessions that if you just want to get some momentum in writing a paper, you can do that in a great peer context. And then finally, I just wanted to let you know that if you do submit to JANZSSA, and we hope that you do lots of great practitioner insights, if you do submit and we do find that you might be new to writing an academic paper, I just wanted to let you know that we also have a writing coaching program. And so at JANZSSA, you might not necessarily get a no, but you might get a, hey, we're inviting you to join the writing coaching program to help you with your manuscript. So with that, I think we'll call it a wrap. But happy data trails, everyone. And if you have any questions, please send them through to us, and we'll share them with Christine and Dana for some insights. We will also make this recording available on the JANZSSA website moving forward, and we very much appreciate your insights and your voice. So if there are other topics that are really relevant to you, please also let us know, because we really want to shape the professional development series with you and in partnership with you. So with that, have a lovely rest of your Friday, and we will see you hopefully at the next session. Thanks, everyone.